able to see this now? Yes, we are recording. All good. All right. Hello, everyone. Just before I get started, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you could please keep your questions until then, that would be great. Also, feel free to pop them into the chat so you don't forget, and we can fish them out from there at the end of the presentation. So my name is Andrew, and this is me holding my first computer. If you recognize this machine, please give us a shout in chat. Also, if you would like to share what was your first machine, also give us a shout. I love to hear people's stories of how they got started with all this. So at the Scale Factory, I have a couple of roles. My main role is a senior consultant, and in this role, I work with customers who are going through compliance and help them implement the technical side of it on AWS. As the information security manager, like Topper said earlier, I'm responsible for our internal security compliance program. And that side of things helped me get familiar with the organizational aspects of the standard. So I have a fairly good grasp of both ends of it, but I'm a systems guy at heart, so the technical parts are really where I specialize in. I started in computer networks, then worked as a sysadmin for a while, then DevOps when that became fashionable, and now I mainly work with AWS. I still like 8-bit computers. I think maybe because there's very little security involved in them. In fact, there's almost no security involved in them. So there it is. But let's try and get to know you a little bit. We've got the poll, which you can have a go at. So why are you interested in ISO 27001 compliance? You want to improve your information security. Maybe you want to unblock a sales deal. Maybe you have a contractual obligation, or maybe your advisor told you to do it, or maybe your boss told you to do it, which is definitely what got me around to it. And also, are you currently on AWS? So, so far, looks like everyone is on AWS. And most of you want to improve your information security. That's good to know.
So we'll give it another sort of 15 seconds or so on the poll, and then we'll close it out, and I'll share the results.
Okay. It's a bit of a race between unblocking a sales deal and improving your information security. Who's going to win?
That's the poll ended. You should all be able to see the results now, in theory. So yes, most people want to improve their information security, which is probably the best reason to be doing this to some extent. And a couple of non-AWS users. Okay, maybe we can change that for you.
All right. I can just make this pause window disappear without breaking anything. All right, there we go. Okay, so ISO 27001, what is it? So it is an internationally recognized standard that establishes the requirements for an information security management system. It's non-prescriptive and instead takes more of a risk-based approach. And what that means is that the standard doesn't tell you exactly what to do. It's more of a framework on how to do it. So for example, it won't tell you exactly how long you should retain your backups for. Instead, it will tell you that you should work that out based on your requirements and risks. And this can be a bit of a double-edged sword sometimes. On one hand, it gives you a bit of wiggle room to adopt the standard to your business, which is great. No two organizations are the same. But on the other hand, it can be ambiguous and open to interpretation, which may depend on who your auditor is. Also, be careful when you're researching information online. Sometimes you might find perfectly valid bit of information about the standard that's valid for one organization, but it might be completely wrong approach for you. So always keep an eye out on that. Why do we need it? So customers have to conduct supplier due diligence in order to reduce their supply chain risks. They are probably following a standard like ISO 27001 themselves. And also in the past, well, it's sort of happening all the time, we're having quite a lot of supply chain issues going on. So some of you may remember 2019 SolarWinds. That was a pretty spectacular one where foreign intelligence agencies got access into multiple government departments internationally that went undetected for months. That was a bit of a boo-boo. They're still in business somehow. I don't know why, but hey. Just at the beginning of this year, we had a couple of big ones. We had LastPass and Circle CI, both of which are fairly critical to information security. I'm sure some of you had the displeasure of rotating your passwords because of it. So it's a big problem. But how can you evaluate the security of an organization from the outside? It's not easy. And unfortunately, the best we can do so far, apparently, are supplier security assessment questionnaires. Like, I'm personally not a big fan of those. I think we can do better as an industry, but here we are. So they are usually fairly extensive, can contain hundreds of questions without a lot of nuance to them. So it often doesn't matter if your work involves handling sensitive information or something completely trivial. The supplier procurement team well, the customer procurement team will usually send you the very same questionnaire. So you may be answering questions that are not really relevant to what you're doing. Those can be quite technical sometimes and may require the attention of the CTO or CISO to complete. And I'm sure they can spend the time better on other tasks. One observation that sort of came to us as we were going through those questionnaires is that there's a lot of overlap between the questions on the questionnaires and security standards, such as ISO 27001. So let's come back to that, but before we do, let's have another poll about supplier questionnaires. A little bit ironic, I know. So what's the largest supplier questionnaire you've ever dealt with? Let's see who's the winner on that one. And how many questionnaires did you get to answer in the last year?
Again, we're going to leave that poll open just for probably about a minute in total, or 90 seconds, just to give everyone the chance to answer that. See who's paying attention. Nobody's answered 1,000+ questions yet, which I think is
I've been waiting for
extreme.
that one. But 500 to 1,000, you know, that's fairly hefty.
That is hefty, yeah. So 3 people have answered 500 to 1,000 questions, apparently. For those of you who did answer 3, for those 3 of you who did answer that, maybe drop in the chat what industry you're in, like what was the sort of what type of company were you selling to that was asking that many questions. So it's always interesting to find out. 4 people apparently. Cool. And we'll give that just another 10 seconds, and then I'm going to end the poll. Banking, fintech, of course, yeah. The biggie. Yeah. We see that. And Alex has got the overlap of health tech and finance, because he's an overachiever, Alex. Cool. Let's end that poll. I will share the results so that everybody can see where those are. That's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, so 50 to 500 is the most common one. And then yeah, we've got some big ones in the more regulated industries. Cool. Thanks for
good stuff. All right, that's it.
Right, so with compliance, those questionnaires can become easier to answer, and that's because of that overlap that I talked about earlier. Also, it makes it easier to delegate some of that procurement paperwork to other people, which is always nice. In some cases, you may be able to avoid those questionnaires altogether. You can shorten your sales cycle, and we had customers report shortened sales cycle by as much as a month, and those are significant savings there. You can close bigger deals. Some of the more enterprisey customers will not work with you unless you are compliant with a security standard like ISO. Also, you can reduce, last but not least, and I'm very happy that in the initial poll, the majority of you said that this is why you're doing it. You can reduce your own operational risks. So even if you think you are fairly well sorted in terms of security, I can guarantee you that going through compliance will uncover some areas that maybe you didn't know you had that you could improve. So it's worth doing for that reason alone. So the standard comes in two parts. We've got the non-negotiable part that sets out the requirements for an ISMS, and you have to implement all of that. So that's the ISO 27001. We also have ISO 27002, also known as the Annex A, and that contains a list of optional security controls, which you may choose to adapt depending on which ones are applicable to your business. So you don't have to use them, but the standard says that you have to consider them. And I will talk a little bit more in where Annex A fits within the ISMS later on. There are 93 controls in the 2022 version. We are down from 114 in the 2013 version, which was the previous version. I find the new version laid out a bit better. It's a little bit easier to follow. So if you are starting now, I would recommend going with the 2022 version. And also in the rest of this presentation, that's what I'm going to refer to, but they are fairly similar. So where do we start? So I've got a very sort of high-level outline here for you. I won't be able to cover all of these points because of the limited time, but we are going to follow up with a white paper that goes into a bit more detail on all of these areas. Today, I'm going to mainly talk about how to implement Annex A controls on AWS, so mostly focusing on the technical aspects, but I will also scratch the surface of establishing an ISMS. I've got a tip here for you that can hopefully save you a bit of time and effort. I wish I knew it before I started. I will also touch on risk assessment a little bit, just because it's such a fundamental part of the standard. So my first tip for you is automated compliance platforms. So establishing an ISMS can be complicated. Luckily, there is now software that can help us do it. The one we like and the one that a lot of our customers are using and have recommended to us is Vanta. And again, I won't be able to cover all of the things it does. It basically covers all of the aspects of the ISMS that you need. I started before we had Vanta, and I got to re-implement all of that using spreadsheets, which again wasn't the best use of my time. This makes it a lot easier. Like some of the things that I would like to highlight are policy templates. It's always nice to start with a template and then you can fine-tune it for your organization. Saves a bunch of time. The risk register is really good. It had a revamp recently, and it integrates with ticketing systems such as Jira or Trello, so you can track the risk remediation in your favorite tracker. And also, this is a webinar about AWS and compliance. So Vanta has a quite nice AWS integration, which can help you collect evidence for audits. It integrates with Amazon Inspector for automated vulnerability management. It can do asset discovery and things like that. So check it out if you haven't already. It's worth looking at. Okay, now let's have a look at risk. This is what I call the risk reduction cycle. I've just made this up, but it's a variation on the plan, do, check, and act method of iterative design, which you often hear in the context of the standard, but more focused on risk. And this is one of the main cycles you have within the framework. And it starts with assessing the risks. And once you've identified your risks and you score them, you don't have treatment. You don't have to decide how you're going to treat those risks. And we've got a few options here. You can either accept the risk if it's low enough and not worry about it. You can modify the risk if you want to reduce it. You can share the risk, for example, by outsourcing it to another company or taking insurance. Or you could avoid the risk by, for example, if you have a dodgy application which isn't very useful, you can stop using it and then that risk goes away. If you decide to modify the risk, then this is where the Annex A controls come in. You get to choose the controls which you can use to reduce the risks. And yeah, the standard says you have to consider the Annex A controls. You don't have to use them. You can choose your own controls if you want to, but you have to show that you've considered them. And once you've chosen your controls, then you need to implement them, evaluate the results, make sure those controls are working for you as expected, and then assess the risk. Like, risk can never be completely eliminated. It can only be reduced. There will be always some residual risk left after you treated it. And you get to decide whether this is acceptable or not. If it's not acceptable, you continue the cycle until it is acceptable. Also, as time goes by, you will identify new risks, and this cycle is something that goes on and on. And also, this wouldn't be a security talk on AWS without mentioning the shared responsibility model. So in this model, AWS takes care of the security of the cloud. This involves physical security of the data centers, the networking equipment, the underlying hypervisor, for example, the Nitro system. That's all taken care of by AWS. You as the customer are responsible for the security in the cloud. And that involves things such as VPC configuration, encryption of your data, choosing the correct IAM permissions, patching your EC2 instances. And there is a bit of variation here depending on which services you choose to use. If you are using infrastructure as a service, such as EC2, then you get to patch the operating systems. If you are using platform as a service, such as ECS and Fargate, for example, then the bar moves up a little bit, and now AWS are responsible for maintaining the compute layer, which you don't have the access to. So you can reduce your scope by carefully choosing how you run within AWS. And also, just by the virtue of being on AWS, you can avoid some of the Section 7 controls from Annex A, which deal with physical security. That involves physical security perimeters, physical entry, cabling security, and all that stuff. So you already have reduced the scope here a little bit. So let's have a look at implementing Annex A controls on AWS. So I chose the control 815, which is logging, and that's because it's a control that's probably applicable to everyone here, right? It's a fundamental part of security. So the control says to record events, generate evidence, ensure integrity of log information, prevent against unauthorized access, identify information security events that can lead to an information security incident, and to support investigations. So before jumping into the implementation, I also like to map out the dependencies of that control, because you can find that a lot of those controls are interrelated and there are overlaps between them. So through mapping this out, you can sort of get your ducks in a row and save a bit of time going back and forth, realigning things later, right? And you can also tick boxes in other areas of the standard and make those areas easier to meet. So in this case, we've got 525, assessment and decision on InfoSec events. So that relates to security incident response. It means that your log files may have indicators of compromise in them or some other events that you may wish to use to trigger your incident response. So you need to have a process in place for that. Collection of evidence, so you need to make sure that any evidence collected for forensic investigation are sound and could be admissible in court, for example. Privacy and protection of personally identifiable information. Well, ideally, you don't have any PII in your logs, and you should have controls that prevent that from happening. But if you do, then those need to be protected according to your privacy policy. Information deletion, how long do you retain this data for? Data masking, again, if you have sensitive information in your log files, you might want to anonymize it in some way, and the Section 811 has got some guidelines around that. We've got monitoring activities, time synchronization, and use of cryptography, which are all fairly self-explanatory. I will touch on the use of cryptography a little bit later. So the logging control spans over 3 pages of Annex A. This is a summary of it in just bullet points. Again, that's worth doing just to keep yourself on target. And again, those are guidelines, not requirements. So how far you go with them, again, depends on your particular business. So here the standard has got some opinions about how we should structure our logs and what types of events we should be logging on. Also, the logs should be protected from deactivation, and that includes privileged users, which can be tricky sometimes. They should be protected from deletion, modification, failure of storage media. They should be stored in line with your data retention requirements. So again, this is overlap with your data retention policy. Sensitive data in logs must be protected, and you should have some way of analyzing the logs and detecting anomalous behavior. So let's try to get those picked. Starting with the simplest example we can get, we've got a single AWS workload account with CloudTrail in it. So just out of the box, we can tick a couple of items on this list. AWS have kindly made sure that the logs are structured in the correct way and they log on the right types of events. Also, we don't have to worry about the storage media because that's taken care for us in this case. But we are still lacking in a few departments here. Mainly, like no matter how many IAM policies you throw at this, the administrative user in that account will be able to potentially turn off the logs or delete trails, right? So yeah, we've got a problem there potentially. So one way we can solve this is by introducing a multi-account architecture. So here we've got a new management account with AWS organizations set up within it. And we've invited our workload account into the organization. Now, organization supports service control policies, and those are similar to IAM, but work on organizational level, and they allow you to restrict actions in the child account, even by the administrator or even by the root user. So here's an example of a service control policy. This one prevents CloudTrail from being disabled or the logs from being deleted. And that means that even if the root credentials were leaked for that account and an attacker has got full access to it, they can't turn off logging, which is an excellent feature. So you can investigate it and have evidence if you need it. So that ticks a few boxes already, but we are still lacking the storage and analytics departments. So what we could do is expand our multi-account architecture further. So here we created a dedicated log archive account in which we have an S3 bucket, and we can ship our CloudTrail logs from all of the other accounts into that centralized bucket. Once we have the logs in the bucket, we can set up lifecycle rules to archive the data into cold storage if necessary, or remove it after a certain period of time. We can also hook it up to analytics. So a cheap and cheerful way of analyzing logs on AWS is using Amazon Athena, which allows you to run SQL queries on your logs. Very useful, quick to get going. A more advanced system would be AWS OpenSearch service, which is basically Elasticsearch and Kibana. You could also hook it up to CloudWatch and alert on anomalous behavior that way. But you could also connect this to external services. You could connect it with Splunk and systems like that. Also, you can sprinkle some more SCPs, service control policies here, to prevent that bucket from being deleted. So if the account gets compromised, the attacker still can't tamper with the logs. I also recommend encrypting those buckets. And here, I'd say use customer managed keys if possible, because that can help you tick some boxes in your cryptographic policy, which has some opinions about key management. And AWS KMS can help here to make that one easy. You can also enable file integrity validation in CloudTrail. And what that does, it will store checksums of the logs alongside your log files, which makes it provable that the logs haven't been tampered with. So again, that's useful for forensic reasons. So, also it's worth saying that that log archive should be restricted in terms of access. Again, having it in a separate account means it's quite easy to do that. You simply allow only the highly privileged users to log into the account. It's a nice, strong isolation boundary. So that helps too. So now we've met that control with this sort of architecture. And with other controls, it's very similar. It's sort of rinse and repeat this process. And the more you do, the more of those you do, the easier they will get because of those overlaps. So as long as you mapped up the dependencies, it will become easier and easier as you go along. The other boxes sort of fill themselves because of the overlaps. So one common theme that cuts through a lot of those controls is segregation. And in AWS, the strongest isolation boundary you can have is an AWS account. Also, AWS accounts don't cost you anything, so you can have as many of them as you want. So having a good account strategy can really make it easier to implement a lot of those controls and make it easier to reason about the policies. In general, if it's easy to draw it on a diagram, it's probably simple enough. Like compared to having complicated policies within a single AWS account, it's quite a big difference. So AWS organizations allows you to organize accounts in organizational units. Those can be hierarchical, and you can attach different security policies at different levels of that hierarchy. There's also inheritance, which makes management a little bit easier. For example, in terms of access control, which is another big area in the standard, you can say now, okay, developers have access to all of the workload accounts under the workload OU, but not to the infrastructure OU, which contains things like your log archive and your backups, which again should be fairly restricted. So that's really simple to reason about and fairly simple to implement too. Another recommendation also related to this high-level account management is AWS Control Tower, which allows you to set up and govern a secure multi-account environment. Excuse me. So Control Tower comes with AWS Account Factory, which allows you to provision new accounts and apply a security baseline to it automatically. It comes with centralized audit logging, very similar architecture to what I showed you earlier. Also comes with AWS IAM Identity Center, which allows you to manage users across your AWS estate. You can integrate it with an identity provider, which is usually a good idea to make your access reviews easier. Again, regular access reviews are part of the ISMS requirements. So it's good to centralize that as much as you can. It also has a very nice workflow for switching between roles and different accounts, both on the web console and on the command line. So it's worth having a look at that. Control Tower comes with some ready-baked controls. We've got 3 kinds of controls available. Preventative controls are implemented using service control policies, like I showed you earlier with the logging example. We also have detective controls. Those are implemented using AWS config and will alert you when some of your resources go out of compliance. So, for example, if somebody creates an unencrypted S3 bucket, you will get an alert in your dashboard. We also have proactive controls. Those are implemented using AWS CloudFormation hooks. They're fairly new, that integration in Control Tower. And those can prevent non-compliant resources from being created, but they only work if you use CloudFormation. So if you use Terraform, you can simply, or something else, you can simply ignore that part. You also get a nice compliance dashboard where you can view the status of your estate. And we usually use this as a foundation for further integration. So we like to sprinkle a bit of Slack integration on this so that we get alerts for when things go out of compliance. You can integrate it with guard duty to get intelligent intrusion detection. Amazon Inspector is another good one to get automated vulnerability management, which also is part of the standard. So yeah, it just can set you up well for the start of the compliance work. Right, we also have some free consultation for you. So if you are yet to start your compliance journey, we've got an AWS readiness assessment, which we can do for you. And that's a review of your current practice and a sort of gap analysis. You can see how far you are from achieving it. If you've already started and you've conducted your risk assessment, we can help you review that risk assessment and give you advice on how to treat some of the AWS specific risks that you may have. And we are going to follow up with details and links after the webinar. And I've got the final poll for you. So how far through the ISO 27001 compliance process do you think you are today? Did you learn something new from this presentation? And will you be booking a free ISO 27001 consultation with the Scala Factory in the future?
If the majority of people answer no, so did you learn something new from this presentation? Andrew's getting fired, so no pressure.
It's not looking too bad. It's not looking too bad. Some of you know too much.
Cool. We have had a few questions in the chat, Andrew, and we've attempted to answer some of them in the chat. We'll also, I'll read them out for you to answer on the thing as well, so that people coming to the recording have access to that. The other Andrew who's joined is asking how we book the assessments. You will get links in an email shortly. Mike might even paste those links into the chat in the immediate term as well, if you want to do that straight away. Just another 15 seconds on the poll, and then I will close it and share the answers. Right, so end the poll, share the results.
Yeah, I'm not getting fired. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Yeah, so this concludes this presentation. I'm going to stop sharing now, and
we'll go to some questions.
We'll go to some questions, yeah.
So kind of early in the session, Gareth Evans was asking, I've created an information security pack in the past that states my company's position using ISO 27002 as a guide. This allowed us to counter a lot of suppliers' questionnaires. What do you see coming next? The old crystal ball question.
What do I see coming next in the supply chain security?
Gareth, do feel free to light your mic up and ask that question.
It was with regards to improving on the back and forth with security questionnaires. You mentioned that you think there's a better way. So what do you see as the better way going forward?
I think something that Vanta does, for example, you can give customers access to the Vanta platform, so they get a dashboard and they can see like real-time compliance information that Vanta has collected from your environments. So they can have a real-time insight into your security. I think that probably is a better approach, an interesting product. I think eventually we'll probably get regulated into doing more on supply chain security because of those questionnaires that don't seem to be working that well so far. Things to happen. So yeah,
it feels to me like there's maybe a future world where the way that we share information about our position is attached to some kind of commonly understood schema. So you could maybe kind of go, okay, we're a good fit on these things, and then we've got these other questions to ask. That would be a massive time saver. I don't know what exists in that space. I would imagine some people are looking at it. I would imagine someone like Vanta would have a good head start on that kind of thing. But it just seems like the type of information we exchange is very structured, and it's all very similar, and it takes a huge amount of time for people to get through. We should be able to make that a digital process at some point, but we'd have to agree on the standards, how we express that. So maybe in another 5 years, who knows?
There are some services that offer to, I forgot the name of the one that has been mentioned recently, that can help you fill those questionnaires out using AI.
Yeah, HyperComply, I think, is one of them. There's some other stuff in that space.
Yeah.
I think you had a second question, Gareth, about engineer development environments, or what? Do you want to just ask the question? Why don't we do that like that?
Yeah, it was how you see companies being able to manage the risk associated with developer environments going forward, where quite often we see them sitting outside AWS infrastructure on local machines.
So often what we see people do is set up developer sandbox accounts within their organization. So you'd have an organizational unit for developers, and they can have their own accounts, which you can then ring fence using things like AWS budgets and service control policies, and monitor them so that they don't go over spending budget and so on. That's one way of tackling this.
That certainly seems popular with the like the serverless crowd, where actually there isn't a really good local analog to be able to build all of that stuff. So we certainly see the serverless people working in that way. We've also seen, I think Mike put in the chat, customers with particularly high compliance requirements. They might set up a virtual desktop environment with AWS workspaces or something like that. So your developers are actually only connecting to a VDI screen rather than anything else, and then you can put some controls around preventing copy and paste and other like really user hostile things to prevent data from leaking out. But I guess that will depend on your risk profile and the type of data you're dealing with, and the assertions you've made to your clients as well about how you're doing that.
Yeah, the sort of data leaking problem. I think the best way to prevent insider type attacks is to treat your employees well.
Not fire them for webinars that people haven't learned anything out, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good start, and maybe putting too many obstacles in the way, which could piss them off.
Reese asks, I'm relatively new to AWS. Where's the best place for me to start looking and building my skills for AWS security? Are there any key courses or certs I should look at to pick up for AWS? I've got 7 or 8 years experience with ISO 27001. That's I guess the opposite to where we started this journey, Reese. As I mentioned in the chat, there is a security specialty certificate that covers a lot of ground on things like KMS and IAM policies and cloud HSM and those sorts of things. But if you're new to AWS, that content probably won't make a lot of sense until you've got into some of the other primitives. And so the Solutions Architect Associate, or maybe the Developer Associate, is a good place to start with that sort of stuff. There's a lot out there. A Cloud Guru are a good source of learning materials for that. There are also your local meetup group. For example, I host the London AWS user group, and we often have talks there about some of those topics. So get involved in your community, I guess, would be part of my advice as well.
Also, I see, just to add to the question asked by Andrew about securing virtual team devices, developer equipment, especially as a startup, we don't issue all the devices. Well, there's a system that we found recently called Collide, which, if you are Slack users, is quite good for securing end devices without being too overbearing. Yeah, disruptive. Yeah. So it uses OS Query under the hood. It's open source. It's run by the people who invented it at Facebook, and it never modifies your device, but it will flag issues with it and tell you how to fix them using Slack.
That's really interesting. That's a superb suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah.
Adam, moving on, says we have no way for us to add our own automated controls to Vanta. The sole option was take a screenshot and upload it. Have you been able to get custom or proprietary automated controls into Vanta?
No, it's not. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that one yet. Do we have anyone from Vanta here?
I'm not sure we've got a Vanta rep on the call. We've recently signed a partnership agreement with Vanta, so we can definitely get some feedback on that. Their integrations with AWS are, I guess, sufficient. Your requirements might be deeper than the sort of sufficient requirements.
So
but
we found that there were like 4 equivalents to Vanta. They're all basically identical, and they're all charging plus or minus 10% of each other. But the frustration with Vanta was that they didn't seem to have any answer to this, where some of the others do, where they give you a SDK where it's like, well, we want to add some proprietary controls. We've got some proprietary systems, either ones that
Yeah.
you guys don't support because they're a bit obscure, or just our in-house stuff. Some of our in-house estate is sufficiently complex and unfortunately touches on issues of security and control and so on. We can't get all of it to work purely inside the AWS world. And it just felt like we kept hitting a brick wall on that, which was frustrating.
Okay, that's very interesting to hear, Adam. Well, if you have experience with the other platforms, which one so do you like? Which one won your
We haven't
affection?
made a final decision yet, but I think
Okay.
the one someone says Strata. Yeah, Strata was the one that was looking best from the last round of review we did on this a week or so ago, because they had a decent SDK. There was another one who their SDK was in beta, and I'm now going to be able to I'll forget the name of them. They had a really generic name. It was something like ISO it's one that's called something like ISO certification or something, and that's the name of their product, or ISMF online or something like that. Or oh no, it was I think it's called Hyperproof. Sorry, they all have stupid names, but there was this one, I think it was Hyperproof, that they have an SDK but it's only in beta. Drata has an SDK but it's live, and Vanta seemed to have no SDK, no interest in having an SDK, and their sales reps didn't seem to understand what we're talking about.
Cool.
Okay.
We'll take that back to our partner reps there. I think it's probably an interesting conversation,
Yeah,
because we're looking at things like Collide. You'd like to be able to have Vanta sort of tell you that your BYOD policy is being conformed to and all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
and
definitely.
If there's a way that Vanta does it, that'd be awesome. I would love to be able to rewrite that and go, right, we can use
I
these
think
guys.
there must be a way to do it, because actually Collide has got an integration with Vanta in beta. So it's it's Collide that have done it, so they must have a way to connect in through an API. But yeah, let us mount to the to our partners and see where we can get with that.
We ultimately we went with Vanta for partnership because that was the name we heard most often when we're talking to clients. So it was obviously popular in the market, and as with our adoption of AWS, for example, like let's go with the one that people are talking about. So but we'll definitely follow that up, and
it's nice and easy to use.
Cool. And then a question from Friso. We have ISAE 3000 instead of true ISO 27001 certification because that was recommended in the past. What's your stake on this? I don't think I even know what ISAE 3000 is. Andrew, have you looked at that?
No, but Tim, have you looked into that? If anyone knows this is a Steam.
So yeah, hi folks. I have to admit the way I came across this was by doing some work with Friso. But yes, it's not something that a lot of our customers have asked about, but ISAE gives you sort of an on-ramp to the certification. So if your end goal is a certificate on the wall, A4 that says ISO 27001 certified, and you want to show that you're delivering value on that journey, achieving ISAE 3402 Part 1 is like, it's going to cost you thousands of pounds less and still give you a piece of paper. So, and you might want to stop there if your suppliers go, oh, that'll do, sale made. The way it works is you still have to do all of the controls out of ISO 27002. What you're missing is evidence that you're continually improving the process. And then by showing that you have put those pieces in and that every year you're getting better and that you're generally managing things well and having evidence of that, you get the whole piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, a lot of these standards are similar or have overlap, or they look the same if you squint. And so I would imagine that any effort you put into adopting one standard is probably going to help you in the direction of others too. So a question from Al, what's the overall process to getting ISO certified and which areas tend to be the hardest? AWS, you had a slide with the sort of sequence of events. You want to throw that back up and make an assessment of which of those is the most difficult?
Let me just fish it out.
You've shut down Keynote already.
Yeah, now it's here. There we go.
I mean, the areas that's the hardest is the dealing with people part of it, right? So it's the way.
Yeah, so the change management can be tricky. I mean, unfortunately, this is very, very high level because otherwise it wouldn't fit on the slide. But yeah, the part of establishing the ISMS, I would say, and the processes involved that are more organizational are the hardest bit, right? Like the implementing technical controls, yeah, it can be hard, but you can delegate it. You can use some services and products that help you with that. Establishing an ISMS, yeah, can be the big and tricky piece. But yeah, I agree with John. Being a boss of a company, yeah, he knows that it's sometimes quite difficult to get everyone on board with these policies. There can be resistance from employees in some cases.
But particularly, I guess, if you're a sort of small and agile moving business who are suddenly introducing checklists for people and, please sign this piece of paper to say that you know and understand this policy, it's very culturally, it's a difficult match, I guess, and for us, it's just been a shift that we've had to make. And the justification is, well, it lets us work on more interesting projects. It lets us work with bigger enterprise customers and so forth. So yes, it's a little bit of an annoyance, but really, it's not a huge change to your day to day. It's just a kind of we're asking you to acknowledge the existence of, read, understand, and follow a number of policies that we've put in place to mitigate risk, and that's your reasonable employees will follow it, and the less reasonable employees will find that a little bit difficult to accept sometimes. But as a business, you've got to push it from the top, right? Me as CEO saying we're doing this it helps that, I think. So we've got some other questions around other compliance regimes. Reese mentions TSACs, which again, I haven't heard of TSACs. Kieran's asking about thoughts on SOC 2 type 1 and 2 versus ISO. I think we see SOC 2 is a topic of conversation more regularly in the States. European businesses tend to think more in terms of ISO 27001, but Andrew, I don't know if you've got some more thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's I think there's something like 80% overlap between the two. So there's a big overlap, and this is where tools like Vanta can really help, because if you meet ISO 27001 in Vanta, then it will show you how far away are you from meeting those other standards that it supports. So that's a pretty cool feature, and then you just fill in the blanks for SOC 2.
Yeah, and Kieran said they're aiming for SOC 2 type 1 first, then type 2, and then ISO. And I think we did a roundtable at SaaStock, and that was the sort of general consensus there as well, that SOC 2 is easier because of how you scope it. And so if you can achieve SOC 2 type 1 and then 2, it's probably easier to get your ISO after that. So definitely worth thinking about in those terms. But if your buyers are asking you for ISO 27001, it might be prudent to start with that and mop up the SOC stuff later, depending on how long that's going to take and what your sort of overall investment as a business is likely to be. Great. I think we'll call that done for questions. Thanks, Andrew, for your presentation, and for Tim, your contribution as well, and Mike also on the chat there. I hope you found this useful. We will follow up by email with a link to the video and the slides from this talk, and we will also link to the health check stuff as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about the types of work that we do at the Scale Factory and how we can help. And if you are currently thinking about ISO or SOC 2 or anything else of that nature on the AWS platform, we'd be really grateful if you consider reaching out to us to help you with that. So thanks for dialing in. I'm now going to stop the recording, and we go into a bit more of a free form discussion if you'd like to stick around and do that.